Acorn was a physical place, but that wasn't Acorn. That wasn't the Acorn. It's where it's held within people, and the Acorn is very much still alive, even though there's no physical unit there anymore. I've been to see the unit. Actually, last year I went and peered through the windows. Obviously, the hospital is closed now, and it wasn't Acorn. It wasn't Acorn that I was looking at, because Acorn is elsewhere now. Acorn is living in all the staff and the service users that were involved in it.
Hi, I'm Naomi Murphy, and this is the Locked Up Living podcast, where we talk with a wide range of people about harsh aspects of institutional life.
We also explore some of the ways to overcome them and to grow and develop. I'm David Jones. So join us every Wednesday morning, 6 o'clock UK time, for a fresh podcast. I met our guest, Ellie Wildbore, when she presented her research at an online community meeting I facilitate. She'd previously presented at the recent Big Spud conference. Ellie is a lived experience expert, and her research is on the effects of being in a therapeutic community 4 years later. The TC in focus is the Acorn service, which was a part of the now sadly almost entirely closed retreat in York. Welcome, Ellie.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Hi, Ellie. Really nice to meet you. Really pleased that you could join us today. Could you begin by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about how you got to the point where you were doing this research project that you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, so I'm Ellie Wildbore. I'm from Sheffield, and I'm 35. And I'm someone who has been living with mental health problems for over 2 decades, and have a long history with mental health services, in and out of hospital, lots of things not working necessarily. And in 2016, I was fortunate enough, because this is not an opportunity given to many, to be admitted to the Acorn programme at the retreat in York, which is a year-long therapeutic community programme for women with borderline personality disorder, trauma. They could manage things like eating disorders as well, because previously I have an eating disorder and I have other mental health diagnoses, and it's quite hard to be treated for both. And each one tends to count you out of treatment for the other. So it was an opportunity to really, really work on the stuff that was, making me unable to live a normal life at all. By that point, I had upwards of 200 admissions to A&E in an 8-month period. I was kind of repeatedly getting sectioned, admitted, released, then back round and round, and nothing had really worked. So the opportunity to go to therapeutic community was like a last chance, and I went, and it was the hardest year of my life, but it was also probably the best year of my life. It taught me a lot about who I am outside of my mental health. It taught me skills in being able to talk to people, talk about what was going on for me, understand my emotions. It was based on a DBT sort of model, so it was very much DBT 24/7. And it didn't fix my life, but it definitely changed it for the better. And I kind of came out not necessarily okay, and I've had a very, very difficult 5 years since I was discharged in the middle of 2017. A lot of housing problems, a lot of issues with things back at home and the services back here. But one of the things that I did gain from being there was understanding that I do actually have something to contribute to society. So I'd begun teaching whilst I was there at universities, and that kind of carried on afterwards. And then I ended up getting a role in research and medical education in Shepherd Health and Social Care, which is my local NHS trust, the one that I'm a service user of, and kind of developed a passion for research in that. And I felt that I would like to just kind of like do a bit of my own stuff, and after having talked to a couple of other Acorns, was like, I think it'd be really good to look into what the long-term impact of being in a therapeutic community is, because I feel that like the fact that I'm still in contact with them all for a start 5 years later, and it's like we just pick up where we left off, and I was like, there's something here that, like, I don't know, it's held in people's hearts some way, and I kind of wanted to find out more about what that experience was like for people. So that's how the research came about.
Thank you. I'm really sad to hear that the retreat closed, actually, because I used to work at Stockton Hall back in the 90s, and which was a medium secure hospital. And actually for some of the patients to move on, actually going to the retreat was a really good next step for people, because you knew people were going to get quite a lot of input, and work being somewhere where there was a sense that was fostering community and connection. And I can really hear that in your answer, that the service did well to create relationships that seemed like there's some depth to them where they could last.
It's really upsetting, the retreat closing as a whole, because I think the retreat as a vessel for Acorn was really good. Like the people on other units had similar experiences to us on Acorn, and it's sad. It's a big part of psychiatry. Like if you look at any history of psychiatry book, the retreat is there mentioned as like the first time people were doing things not in an asylum sort of way. And it's really sad, because I don't see a lot of the values and things from the retreat like elsewhere. So it is sad, and that was another reason that I wanted to do this research, because I think it's important that people know that there's a legacy from things like the retreat and Acorn.
It sounded when you were talking as well, as if there was something about how the retreat fostered thinking about lived experience that seemed to be of genuine value, whereas sometimes I think services do that in a lip service way to try and make their own service look good, rather than really wanting to make use of that in a constructive way. It sounded as though you felt valued for your input.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was the first time I'd been told so many times, you'll never work again, you won't contribute meaningfully to society, you're always going to be like in and out of hospital, never going to recover, all of those sort of things. And the retreat was the first place where I was Ellie, and I had skills as well as weaknesses, and those were celebrated and explored. And we did have the opportunity, like as part of the therapeutic community, we were constantly making our opinions known, and involved in decisions on running the unit and things like that. I got involved more with like wider retreat related stuff, and that's actually something that's a big part of what I do now in my job is bringing the service user voice to services and helping develop them, and that whether that's my own voice or helping other people to have their voice heard. So the retreat really gave me an insight as to how important that can be, and how difficult it can be for services and service users, but it is possible, and it does make the difference.
So can you tell us a bit about your research in terms of what you're doing and how you're going about it?
So I decided that I wanted to interview service users and staff from the Acorn programme. I kind of didn't really know how many people would respond. That was a big concern, obviously. So the Acorn closed in 2018, and I did this research in 2022. So it was 4 years since it had closed, and I didn't know what the response would be at all. So I kind of was going into it with an open mind that I might not get much, or I initially sent out a questionnaire, and I asked people various questions, but also put at the bottom I'd really like to interview some people to talk about their answers more, if you're willing. I expected only a couple of people to respond, even less to be willing to interview. I actually got something I think like 14 responses in the first like 48 hours, which was shocking. Like 4 years after this is finished, like everybody's elsewhere, staff have moved on, service users have moved on. So straight away I got people interested, filling it in, really like going into quite a bit of depth as well about stuff. And like even if I'd stopped there and not done the interviews, I would have had quite a fair amount to go on. But also like most people wanted to do an interview in as well. So I set about like interviewing kind of in a semi-structured way, people via video call usually. And I'm not gonna lie, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Like I could have carried on. It was just that sort of thing that I thought was there. That feeling of Acorn still lives on inside people. Just as soon as I started conversations with people, it was there. It was living inside of them. And a lot of the people, particularly the staff that I interviewed, were people who weren't at Acorn when I was at Acorn. So I'd never met them before. Our only connection was that we'd been at Acorn at some point along its timeline. And some of the staff were there from when it had first set up, and some were there like at the end, like so anywhere in the middle. And it just straight away I was like, yeah, this does leave an impact. And yeah, so I had those conversations. They were really good. And then I kind of set about like doing a sort of like thematic analysis of what was brought to me, which took quite a while as one person doing that, and drew out some themes about the impact, basically, both positive and negative. And it was, yeah, it's been really interesting. So that's how I did it. Yeah, it was very low budget, like no budget basically. But yeah, I got
as you were talking, you can really hear your passion and enthusiasm for your research and also the Acorn project. And I suppose it's reminded me a bit of David and I doing some research with some other people on the limit of the perhaps limited shelf life of services for people who've been diagnosed as, for want of a better label, personality disordered or complex post-traumatic stress, and how it can seem like services which have real value and meaning, and that live on in people that have been involved with those services, whether as staff or patients, and can be seen as a good service, and yet can somehow find that everything falls away and those services end up closing, and it can be hard to make meaning of why that happens. As you were talking, that was really resonating in terms of you describing the service that was obviously really not only valuable and meaningful for you, but the fact that people want to come forward and talk about their experiences suggests that it's got a special place in the heart of these 14 people that came forward. So, you know, what did you find out? How were people affected by the service?
Well, I think like what you've just been talking about it sort of like people holding it in their hearts. I think that was one of the biggest things that came out, that actually Acorn wasn't a physical place. It was a physical place, but that wasn't Acorn. That wasn't the Acorn. It's where it's held within people, and Acorn is very much still alive, even though there's no physical unit there anymore. I've been to see the unit. Actually, last year I went and peered through the windows. Obviously, the hospital is closed now, and it wasn't Acorn. It wasn't Acorn that I was looking at, because Acorn is elsewhere now. Acorn is living in all the staff and the service users that were involved in it. So I think that was a really big thing that came through. That it's more of a state of being than a place. So yeah, I found out a lot. So as I said before, the staff ranged from people who'd helped set the unit up and people who'd stayed till the bitter end and in between. Service users that had less of a wide sort of spectrum of people. They were more towards the tail end. However, I have had experience of meeting people who'd been there a very long time ago and traveling up to a reunion that happened every 3 years, and still sort of like feeling that it was important enough 20 years later that they needed to do that. So I already kind of knew that it did stick around for people. But yeah, I think the first section that I sort of drew out was impact on life in general. So everybody sort of like reported how proud they were of being part of Acorn and how it sort of impacted everything they did in the future, whether that was like professional, personal, relationships. It brought them food for thought, and they were a lot more sort of like curious about things, didn't just launch into things, could like sit back and take a better view point before jumping into something. People said Acorn made them think in a different way. They became more reflective in themselves, and for clinicians they say extended to their practice, and they sort of like became more mindful of the here and now instead of like panicking about the future or the end goals for this service user. They maybe were thinking, actually we need to look right here and now. A massive thing, and this was for the staff as well as the service users, but I think particularly poignant for the service users, is the feeling of belonging and togetherness that you get on Acorn and in a therapeutic community in general. Like for a lot of us, it was the first time we'd had somewhere to belong, and had people at our sides who were supporting us, and that like brought a sense of security and comfort, and that therefore meant that you could sort of tackle harder issues because you felt secure in that belonging. So that was really, really important, and something that staff noticeably missed in their on their roles after Acorn. They never felt quite as much part of a team. Learning was another thing. Like Acorn is a learning experience every single day for staff, service user, and it is when you leave, like that carries on. There's learning that mistakes are okay. In fact, they're actually quite useful if you sit back and look at what happened and think about how you might change that in the future. It's definitely something I learned, that it's okay to fall down. I'm a roller skater, and actually like I kind of learned with roller skating that you need to let yourself fall and be okay with falling, so that you can actually become a good skater. If you're a skater who's going to be like, I'm never going to fall, you're never going to be a good skater. You're never going to be like relaxed into it. And I think it's very much the same. It was the same on Acorn. It was like, mistakes are okay, they're not a bad thing, and a lot of us had been taught that mistakes were a bad thing and were to be punished, but actually they're learning opportunities. So that was a big one, learning. Sort of shared responsibility as well, of like risks and things like that. You often hear of people with borderline personality disorder being told that they need to take responsibility and they need to do it all themselves, and like the sort of would help and support being withdrawn because they've got borderline personality disorder. But like the importance of actually that being something that's held by staff members and by service users, and working in collaboration is going to help, that was really, really important. And that like led into the sort of positive risk taking stuff. So we on Acorn didn't have, like, we could have a machete in our rooms if we wanted, but as long as we could promise that we'd be safe not using it, and we had the options to hand things in if we felt that they were unsafe, rather than them being taken off you, which kind of like further leads to like a sense of lack of control. And I know for me that can escalate my self-harming behavior. So like a positive risk taking and learning to sit with that, learning to sit with the anxiety, but actually the learning that comes from that. And again, sometimes the positive risk taking does go wrong. People may still self-harm or come in danger in some way, but you learn from that, and that's been something that like staff have struggled with, especially in like new teams, is just the unwillingness of services in general, statutory services, to take positive risks that actually might help people forward. And with service users, it again, if I know I've been in the position where I have been in like care homes and stuff since, or people might be in hospital and they're back at that situation where everything's taken off you, and it just doesn't help. So positive risk taking was a really, really big one. And yeah, self-worth was a big one. Again, goes back to that belongingness. A lot of us came with zero self-esteem, zero knowledge of who we were, and that was something that was built up. People were like, before Acorn, I felt I was worthless and insignificant, but it helped them find some self-worth. And then lastly in that area was like an impact on like understanding trauma and self-destructive behaviours. It often was the first time where people were in a trauma-informed environment, and like that helped people to sort of like start to learn how to manage those things. And a lot of us, like, we weren't the sort of people who holding an ice cube would help stop us self-harming or drawing on our arms in red pen. Like I definitely thought I was a bit of a failure because I couldn't recover from from that. It didn't help. But I think on Acorn we kind of like got to understand how that like maybe related back to our past experiences and stuff. And the staff reported that it was very helpful in terms of looking at someone holistically and not taking behaviors that might be stressful and anxiety provoking, like to understand more what's going on deep down. So that was the life impacts. And then there was a lot of stuff around interacting with others. Again, often people had not had the opportunity or weren't able to do that. Interpersonal effectiveness is a skill that is taught in DBT, and I used to find it really frustrating actually that we'd be there like arguing about like Acorn problems, like who's doing the washing up, or like why are people been leaving cups out on the side. I used to find it really, really frustrating that we'd spend time in groups on that and not on stuff that felt like it was more important. But actually, I totally underestimated how useful it was to have the opportunity to like challenge others, to advocate for what I felt was right or whatever, because I've had to use those skills so much since I came back home out of Acorn, especially in terms of advocating for my care. And other people like echoed that, like it felt kind of pointless and frustrating at the time, but actually it was a safe environment in which to learn to challenge people. The importance of like working together, kind of that still carried on for people. Service users afterwards felt that they were more confident in saying to their home teams like, I would like this, or I would like to work with you to go forward on this, and like be more collaborative in their care. And the same for the staff. They felt that they valued co-production and service user involvement and sort of collaborative care planning and things much more than they had prior to Acorn. And I think that's really important. That's what we were talking about earlier, like hearing those voices. And I think things like openness and the ability to communicate more effectively and kind of be a bit vulnerable, like the staff would check in groups and bringing that vulnerability sometimes that maybe they weren't having a great day was helpful for us to understand that actually not like just because you're a professional doesn't mean that you aren't a human being. Like what I think I'd been aiming for some sort of like perfection thing, and actually nobody is at that point. We're all human beings, and again it's sort of like being more open about emotions and articulating them was really, really helpful. I can remember going and being like, I don't need to know about emotions, there's just happy, sad and scared, and that's fine. And then by the end I was like able to like break down all the different emotions that I might be feeling, how they might feel in my body and stuff like that. So there was a lot of stuff about understanding emotions and the impacts of those on other people, and or empathizing with someone else's emotions as well, another thing that we maybe hadn't had opportunities to do. And ultimately also the impact of your actions on other people. A lot of people had quite siloed circumstances. When you're in an NHS ward, you don't know what's going on with other people. If you self-harm, the impact is on you, not, well, you don't get talked to about any other impact, whereas actually if that happened on Acorn, we'd have an emergency meeting, we'd talk about it. People would say, Ellie, I am actually really disappointed in you because you promised that you weren't going to self-harm, and you have, and I feel let down because of that. And like, people, it was hard, it was really, really hard to hear that sort of stuff, but actually really important to hear that. And it wasn't in a way that you sometimes get in community mental health services, where you're sort of like accused maybe as a time waster or attention seeking. That wasn't the feedback you were getting. It was just, actually, this is just really hard as someone who cares for you. Seeing this happen is really, really hard. And yeah, I think that was really useful.
Sounds like such a rich piece of research, Ellie, and so much of what you're saying really resonates from working in a couple of services that adopted a lot of therapeutic community principles, if not kind of like pure TCs. But I'm really struck by the similarities of experience of staff and patient and service users that are coming through of both groups of people having a similar experience of learning and growth and belonging. And you can only think that when their staff move on, that's also a good thing for them taking those skills to another place. So, you know, what a shame to have lost such a valuable resource for service users, but also for staff in terms of their development.
Yeah, I think a lot of the staff said it was like one of the probably the area in their professional life where they grew and developed the most. But that like they bring some of that like into their current roles. So in the way, as I said, Acorn is still alive. It's been spread about in different ways, but it is being spread about. There was some negative impacts as well, if you'd like me to talk about those.
Yeah, that would be useful to hear as well.
Yeah, so there were negatives, not as many as there were sort of more positive and stuff, but there were some negatives. The first one being actually that nothing lives up to Acorn. Nothing is like quite the same. You're never going to like have that transparency, that sort of time to reflect, that bond with other people. I know it's something that I quite recently actually have been in a group program for eating disorders, and I found quite frustrating that we were all expected to be in this group together, but also like not know anything about each other. It was all our own journey, and that I couldn't do that. I literally couldn't do that. I've been too primed by Acorn to be like curious about what's going on and like being transparent about things. And yeah, so it is really difficult, and I think staff found that really hard. Like not comparing services with Acorn, and it's a lot of the service users mentioned that they sort of like it made them more frustrated with the inadequacy of mental health services. So yeah, that it was a victim of its own success there a little bit, I think. There was a lot of sort of talks, particularly from service users, around there being too much pressure on the unit, and they felt that sometimes they did have too much involvement in people's care, in their trauma, and treatment decisions. We had to make some quite difficult decisions about whether or not people came to the unit at times. And one time we made that decision that somebody wasn't ready for the unit, and they actually went and jumped off a 3-story building because of the news. And like they were alive, but that was really, really hard to sit with, knowing we'd made that decision. And as I said, we're not clinicians, we're not trained, like that was really hard. And it was felt that sometimes that could be too intense, and then maybe there needed to be a point where it was sort of like, this is too much now, we need to take this elsewhere. And staff sort of reported that it was kind of all consuming, that quite often they weren't engaged in their home lives as much as they wanted to be, because they'd be still mentally in Acorn after the end of the day of work and worrying about what was going to happen tomorrow. So that was a bit of a detrimental effect. And as I mentioned, like traumatic memories, like there were traumatic times on the unit. We did see and be involved in things that were difficult, and like that's, some people reported that that kind of brought a hypervigilance into their life, every day because they'd experienced that. There was some specific stuff around like safeguarding issues and negative relationships with other service users. There were some reports of bullying and things like that. I haven't gone into detail about that when writing up because it would be identifiable, but there were some issues there. So it wasn't all plain sailing, but I think the positives far outweigh the negatives. And even people who had a bad experience on Acorn or only stayed for a little period of time, interestingly enough, still felt that it was important to contribute to this and still feel that Acorn has a place in their lives, however little time they spent there.
Sounded, Ellie, as if what Acorn did was allowed people to just connect and relate as human beings. So whether that be staff or service users, that there was an ability to see one another as human beings and have that common ground in the middle, which obviously is really valuable when people get painted into roles within society. So thanks very much.
No worries.
That's such a brilliant description, Ellie. And as Naomi has already indicated, really, when we started thinking about doing this podcast, which is over 2 years ago now, we were exactly thinking, what is it about some places that means that they live on in the minds of the people who have participated? And then the shadow side of that is, why does that obvious quality of delivery and impact not protect all of them? So many get closed one way or another. So thanks very much for that. And you've already given a brilliant description of your research. How would you sum it up, just in conclusion?
So my question was, is there an impact? Is there a lasting impact? Yes. That was a very, very clear yes. And it's long lasting and it's significant. A lot of people said they don't go a day without thinking of Acorn or something to do with Acorn. And I think the fact that people responded so quickly and willingly shows how much it's at the forefront of people's minds. Some of the people I interviewed had left in 2009, so it was over a decade before I did the interviews, and they still straight away were like, I need to talk about this. I want the opportunity to talk about Acorn. And yeah, that sort of fact that yes, the unit's gone, but Acorn stays with you and it never fully goes away. Like people talked about the environment and being with people who get it was really important. And as one person said, Acorn is not a physical place, it is internalized within those who are part of it and carry it with them. And another staff member described it as all like imagining Acorn now as all those acorns spreading their tentacles and dispersing over a much wider area. So they got some sort of comfort in that it wasn't gone, it was actually just growing more over a wider area. So yeah, it lives on, the culture lives on even after the doors are closed, and the ethos and values have been continuing to be spread. And one of our mottos was from Mighty Oaks, from Little Acorns, Mighty Oaks do grow, and that's definitely true of Acorn. So much so that I got it tattooed on my arm. But yeah, it's yeah, very, very significant. And I'm just keen to get this word out there so that hopefully the therapeutic communities go around in circles, they come in fashion and they go out of fashion, and I'm hoping that doing something like this helps people when they're like, oh, maybe this is a good idea again. They've got some sort of evidence that actually yes, it is, and it can have a really significant effect.
Thank you. So you've obviously been very, very immersed in Acorn and continue to be so. You must have been pretty cross when it closed. How did you manage to keep a balance when undertaking the research, or perhaps you didn't even think that was necessary?
Yeah, I think So for a start, the closure of Acorn was really difficult. I was still in the graduate group, so we could meet once a month for up to a year after we left, and that was always something that I had valued. It was really helpful. I also was looking forward to the 3 yearly reunions that happened, and that sort of knowing that Acorn was there, the physical place was there, was really important. And then all of a sudden it wasn't going to be, and I remember being really, really anxious about that, because at that point I didn't understand that it does live on. I can remember being really anxious about that, and getting my head around the fact that something wasn't going to be there was really, really difficult. So it did have a significant impact, and I struggled managing that, because people back here, or the mental health team back here, didn't understand. They were like, yeah, but you left a year ago now, it doesn't matter. And I think doing things like, I went to the annual forum meeting of the communities a couple of months after Acorn closed, and that was one of the things that came up in the sort of opening meeting. People were talking about how they felt about that, and I think that was really helpful, to be amongst people who understood the significance of what had happened. And talking to my Acorn friends as well, we talked a lot after that had happened. But yeah, in terms of balancing things with the research, I actually ended up doing it at a time when my life was quite chaotic. I'd thought about it earlier, and then when it actually came to when I needed to do it, I'd been uprooted several times that year. I was living in a mental health unit at the time. I was off work, all these sort of things. But because I'd set myself the deadline of the Big Spud conference to present it, I kind of needed to still do it. So I actually really appreciate it. It actually really helped me doing that at that time in my life, where I didn't feel I had any roots, anywhere to hold me down, because I just was being moved around everywhere. I had no control over my life, and actually doing the going through all the interviews and the analysis and writing it all up actually gave me a sense of roots in that time. So actually it worked out quite well for me personally.
Thanks very much. And what about the future? What's your plans for the future?
They change all the time. I am still in a difficult situation mental health wise. They affect me on a day-to-day basis. I'm quite disabled by some of my mental health problems, but I am finally starting to get therapy. It's been a number of years fighting for that, but it's starting to happen. So I'm looking forward to being able to increase my independence and stuff, and start to travel again, and it's just something that's really important to me, and things like that. In terms of my life professionally, I'm still in awe that I've got a job and multiple other bits of work here and there, that I've held that down for 4.5 years now. I've never held a job down for more than 6 months before that, and I'm still in awe about that. I'm off work sick at the moment because of stuff that's going on, and I keep thinking, no, I'm going to go back, and they're gonna be like, no, we can't have you anymore. You've been living the experience too much. My role is a lived experience role, but you've been doing it too much or whatever. But that's just not happening. My colleagues are endlessly supportive. They've renewed my contract for another year. So yeah, professionally things going forward, and they are going forward despite my mental health problems getting in the way. And just opportunities like this, and research has really grabbed me somewhere within my geeky heart. I'm just kind of a bit addicted to research, so I've got quite a couple of plans coming up with sort of research projects in collaboration with other people. I'm continuing doing it through my work in the NHS as well, and then I just want to see where the world takes me, if I'm honest. I've always put a lot of, I need to be doing this by X year or whatever, and that just gets me down, because inevitably something happens and I don't. But now I'm just happy treading the road and seeing where it takes me, and so far it's taken me to some pretty cool places. So yeah. So
it sounds like following your interest and your curiosity is one way that look after yourself. Do you have other ways in which you care for yourself and ensure your ongoing well-being?
Yeah, the aforementioned roller skating is a big part of it. Actually for me, that's been a massive part in reducing self-harm. So I found out on Acorn, when I looked into it a little bit more, what self-harm gave me, that one of the things that I need is a sense of risk. I need that in my life, and roller skating, so I do it in skate parks. I'm chucking myself off 10-foot ramps on teeny weeny little wheels. That's risky. It's definitely risky, but it's a more socially acceptable way of risk taking, and it's allowed me to learn to appreciate my body as the important machine it is, rather than trying to constantly damage it. I've got to take care of it. To skating, it's a heavy sport, so that's been massive, and learning that I can learn stuff. I love learning, and I learn stuff, pushing my body to the limits, but again in a socially acceptable way, and like social wise as well. Like, before I went to Acorn, my life was just other people who are in mental health units and with mental health problems. And that's really important that there are some people like that in my life, but I need a balance. And so that helps me. Skating, I've just got so many good friends all over the world from skating, and that's really important. And I'm appreciated in the skating community for who I am and what I bring, and actually kind of quite well known for doing that despite the mental health problems, and so that's really nice. I found my sense of belonging somewhere that I kind of needed after Acorn, so that's a big thing. I also just like doing things like gardening, making stuff from scratch. You won't be able to see on the podcast, but I've got my cat Mimi behind me, so my animals help, and yeah, just taking time sometimes to take a step back and look at things from a little bit further away, and be a bit kinder to myself. I'm still working on that, definitely, but understanding that it's okay to be like not okay sometimes. That's still an ongoing journey, but
lovely. Thanks very much, Ellie. It's been really lovely talking with you.
I really enjoyed. Sorry.
I was saying it's been really good. Thank you for having me once again.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that conversation, Ellie. It was lovely and quite moving to hear you talk about, because of that. I think that sense of experience that you have when you work in one of these kind of places or have some association with them. And so really, really moving to hear about your research. Thank you.
Thank you.